There comes a moment in the life of an empath that almost nobody sees. From the outside, it looks quiet. No screaming, no revenge, no dramatic announcement, just silence. But inside, something irreversible has happened. A line has been crossed, a door has closed. And once that door closes, it almost never opens again. People misunderstand empaths because they confuse kindness with weakness. They think the empath keeps forgiving because they don't notice the lies. They think the empath keeps returning because they don't understand what is happening. They think the empath stays because they have no boundaries. Nothing could be further from the truth. The empath sees more than most people realize. They notice the change in your tone. They notice the hesitation before your words. They notice when your smile doesn't reach your eyes. They notice the inconsistency between what you say and what you do. They notice everything, but they also believe in people. That is their gift. And sometimes that is their curse, because an empath has an extraordinary capacity to see potential. They see the person someone could become. They see the pain beneath the anger. They see the wounded child hiding behind destructive behavior, and because they see these things, they give chances, then another chance, then one more, and then another, not because they are blind, because they are hopeful. They believe people can grow. They believe people can heal. They believe love can change things. Honestly, for a long time, that hope keeps the relationship alive. But every empath has a limit. Every soul has a threshold. Every heart has a point where it finally says, enough. And when an empath reaches that point, something changes forever. The most dangerous thing you can do is assume the empath will always forgive, because forgiveness and access are not the same thing. An empath may forgive you in their heart. They may release the resentment, they may let go of the anger, but they may never allow you back into their life. That is the point people fail to understand. There is a difference between healing and returning. There is a difference between peace and reconciliation. There is a difference between letting go and giving someone another opportunity to hurt you. The empath learns this lesson the hard way, always the hard way. Usually after giving too much, after sacrificing too much, after explaining themselves too many times, after carrying emotional weight that was never theirs to carry. At first, they don't even realize what is happening. They simply feel tired, then exhausted, then emotionally numb. Then one day they wake up and something is gone. The fight is gone. The need to fix things is gone. The urge to explain is gone. The desperate hope that everything can return to the way it used to be is gone. This is the point of no return. It is not anger. It is clarity. And clarity is terrifying to people who benefited from your confusion. Because when an empath finally sees things clearly, they stop negotiating with their own pain. They stop making excuses for repeated disrespect. They stop calling betrayal a misunderstanding. They stop calling manipulation love. They stop calling neglect a rough season. They stop abandoning themselves to keep everyone else comfortable. That version of the empath no longer exists. The person who tolerated endless disappointment is gone. The person who kept reopening wounds is gone. The person who kept holding without evidence is gone. And when that person disappears, there is no way back. The people around them are often shocked. They say things like, "You've changed. You used to be different. You've become cold." No, the empath has not become cold. They have become aware. There's a difference. Coldness is the absence of feeling. Awareness is the refusal to ignore reality. An empath at the point of no return still feels deeply. They still care. They still wish people well. But they no longer sacrifice themselves to prove their love. That chapter is over. Because eventually pain becomes information. The repeated lies become information. The broken promises become information. The disrespect becomes information. The inconsistency becomes information. And information changes behavior. You cannot keep touching fire and act surprised when you finally stop putting your hand into the flames. You cannot keep breaking someone's trust and expect unlimited access to their heart. You cannot keep taking without giving and expect the connection to remain the same. Even the most compassionate person eventually reaches a limit, and when an empath reaches theirs, the shift is profound. It looks like indifference, but it isn't. It is acceptance. Acceptance that some people do not want to change. Acceptance that some relationships only survive because one person keeps carrying all the weight. Acceptance that love alone cannot save something that is built on disrespect. This realization hurts. In fact, it may be one of the deepest pains an empath ever experiences, because empaths do not give up easily. When they think that we walk away, it usually means they stayed far longer than they should have. It means they tried. It means they forgave. It means they hoped. It means they waited. And eventually something inside them finally understood the truth. Nothing changes if nothing changes. That realization creates an emotional earthquake, because now they must grieve not only the person, they must grieve the future they imagined, the conversations they thought they would have, the healing they thought would happen, the loyalty they thought existed, the version of the relationship they believed was possible. They mourn all of it. And when the grieving is finished, something extraordinary happens. Peace arrives. Not happiness, not excitement. Peace. Some kind of peace that comes from no longer arguing with reality. The kind of peace that comes from choosing yourself. The kind of peace that comes from closing a door that should have been closed a long time ago. This is why empaths rarely return once they reach the point of no return, because it took too much to get there. Too many sleepless nights, too many tears, too many disappointments, too many internal battles. People see the final decision. They don't see the 1,000 invisible decisions that came before it. They don't see the moments the empath stayed when leaving would have been easier. They don't see the times they forgave in silence. They don't see the emotional labor. They don't see the exhaustion. They only see the ending and they mistake the ending for suddenness. But nothing about it is sudden. The empath left emotionally long before they left physically. They detached one painful realization at a time, one broken promise at a time, one betrayal at a time, one disappointment at a time, until one day, there was nothing left to hold on to except self-respect. And self-respect changes everything. Because once an empath discovers their own value, they become very difficult to manipulate. Guilt no longer works. Empty apologies no longer work. False promises no longer work. The old patterns stop working because the old version of the empath is gone. In its place stands someone new. Someone who still loves deeply, but someone who finally loves themselves too. One who still believes in people, but no longer ignores evidence. Someone who still has compassion, but also has boundaries. And boundaries are what protect the empath's destiny. Because every unnecessary attachment steals energy. Every toxic connection steals peace. Every unhealthy relationship delays growth. At some point, the empath realizes that protecting their energy is not selfish. It is necessary. Because they cannot become who they are meant to be while constantly repairing damage caused by people who refuse to change. The point of no return is not the death of love, it is the birth of wisdom. It is the moment the empath understands that forgiveness does not require reconnection. That compassion does not require sacrifice. Only things that understanding someone does not obligate you to stay. And once this truth becomes part of who they are, there is no going back. Because some lessons change you permanently, some pain awakens you permanently, some betrayals teach you permanently, and some doors close so that your life can finally begin. The strange thing about the point of no return is that it doesn't feel powerful in the beginning. It feels empty. It feels like standing in a house after the storm has passed and realizing there is nothing left to repair. For a while, the empath mistakes this emptiness for sadness. They wonder if something is wrong with them. Why don't I miss them the way I used to? Why don't I feel the same urgency? Why don't I want to fix this anymore? Only something fundamental has changed. The emotional contract has been broken. Trust has been exhausted. Hope has been depleted. And once hope disappears, relationships become memories. People often believe the final goodbye is the painful part. For an empath, the painful part happened long before that. The painful part was staying. The painful part was believing. The painful part was carrying the relationship alone. The painful part was explaining the same hurt over and over again and watching nothing change. The painful part was realizing that your kindness was being mistaken for permission. Because there comes a moment when an empath understands a hard truth. Some people do not appreciate your heart. They study it. They learn your patience. They learn your forgiveness. They learn your empathy. Then they begin to depend on it. They assume you will always understand, always stay, always return, always give one more chance. This creates a dangerous illusion. The illusion that the empath has no limits, but everyone has limits. Even the ocean has a shore. Even the strongest bridge has a breaking point. Even the most patient soul eventually becomes tired. And when an empath becomes tired in a certain way, something unusual happens. They stop arguing. They stop defending themselves. They stop chasing closure. They become quiet. People often misunderstand the silence. They think the empath is calming down. They think the empath is processing. They think there is still time, but the silence means something entirely different. The silence means the emotional departure has already begun because empaths rarely leave in anger. They leave in understanding. They understand they cannot force honesty. They understand they cannot force effort. They understand they cannot force someone to value what they never appreciated. This understanding creates detachment, and detachment is one of the most powerful things an empath will ever experience. Because when you detach, your energy comes back, your thoughts become clear, your intuition becomes louder. Your emotions stop being controlled by another person's choices. Do you remember who you were before you spent all your time trying to save someone else? That is why some people panic when an empath becomes silent. They can feel the shift. They can feel that something is different. The same words no longer work. The same apologies no longer work. The same emotional games no longer work. Because the empath has crossed an invisible line, a line where self-respect becomes stronger than attachment, a line where peace becomes more important than history, a line where reality becomes more important than potential. This is the point of no return, and once it happens, it is incredibly difficult to reverse. Not because the empath is stubborn, not because they are cruel, because trust is expensive mission, and rebuilding it requires more than words. It requires consistency. It requires accountability. It requires change. Most people underestimate how deeply an empath feels betrayal, because betrayal is not just the event itself, it is the collapse of meaning. It is discovering that the person you protected did not protect you. It is realizing that the person you trusted did not value your trust. It is seeing a completely different reality than the one you believed existed. That realization changes people, especially empaths. Because empaths invest deeply. They don't give pieces of themselves. They give entire chapters, entire seasons, entire versions of themselves. And when that investment is repeatedly dishonored, something inside them closes. Not forever, just to the source of the pain. This is why an empath can appear completely done one day. People ask, how can you stop caring so quickly? The truth is, they didn't. They cared for too long. They cared through disrespect. They cared through disappointment. They cared through broken promises. They cared until caring became self-destruction. Then one day survival took over, and survival whispered a simple sentence: no more. Those two words change everything. No more explaining, no more chasing, no more sacrificing peace, no more caring what belongs to someone else, no more accepting less than what is healthy. This is not revenge. This is recovery. An empath at the point of no return is recovering themselves, recovering their energy, recovering their confidence, recovering their identity, recovering the parts of themselves they gave away in the hope of being loved. Because that is one of the deepest wounds many empaths carry. The belief that love must be earned through sacrifice. The belief that if they give enough, understand enough, forgive enough, then eventually they will receive the same in return. Life teaches them otherwise. Real love is reciprocal. Real love is respectful. Real love does not require self-abandonment. This lesson changes the empath permanently. They become more selective, more observant, more protective of their peace. And some people call this coldness. It isn't. It is wisdom purchased through pain. The empath finally understands that not everyone deserves unlimited access to their heart. Not everyone deserves another chance. Not everyone deserves an explanation. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is quietly close the door and walk away. Because closure does not always come from another person. Sometimes closure comes from seeing the pattern clearly. Seeing the pattern and finally refusing to participate in it. This is where personal power begins. Not in controlling other people, but in controlling your response to them. The empath who reaches the point of no return discovers something extraordinary. They are no longer afraid of losing people who repeatedly hurt them. They become afraid of losing themselves, and that fear protects them. Because once you know what it costs to betray yourself, you become very careful about who you allow into your life. You begin paying attention to actions instead of promises, patterns instead of potential, consistency instead of chemistry, peace instead of excitement. This is maturity. This is emotional intelligence. This is the transformation that pain creates. The empath who once ignored red flags now notices them immediately. The empath who once sort of explained now says less. The empath who once tolerated disrespect now quietly leaves. The empath who once stayed too long now understands timing. And perhaps the most important change of all is this. They stop trying to convince people to love them correctly. They stop trying to teach people how to value them. They stop trying to earn basic respect because they realize something powerful. The right people do not require endless demonstrations of your worth. The right people do not repeatedly wound you and call it love. The right people do not make you fight for the bare minimum. This realization creates peace. Not perfect peace, but honest peace. The kind of peace that comes from no longer negotiating your value. The kind of peace that comes from no longer begging for consistency. The kind of peace that comes from finally choosing yourself. And once an empath experiences that peace, there is almost no chance of returning to who they used to be. Because they remember the cost. They remember the sleepless nights. They remember the anxiety. They remember the emotional exhaustion. They remember how much of themselves they lost trying to save something that only one person was fighting for. They remember. And memory becomes wisdom. Wisdom becomes boundaries. Boundaries become freedom. And freedom becomes the new standard. That is why the point of no return is so misunderstood. People think it is anger. It is not. People think it is punishment. It is not. People think it is bitterness. It is not. It is acceptance. Acceptance that not every relationship can be saved. Acceptance that not every apology deserves access. Acceptance that some endings are necessary. Acceptance that self-respect sometimes requires goodbye. And once an empath reaches that understanding, they rarely look back, not because they never cared, but because they finally cared about themselves too.